The rain that night didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to erase the city, hammering against the pavement with a relentless, rhythmic violence that matched the pounding in Keisha's chest. She was 24, tired, and bone-deep lonely, the kind of exhaustion that settles into the marrow after 14 hours of being invisible. Working as a secretary at 24/7 Global Logistics wasn't just a job, it was a daily exercise in humiliation, a place where her diligence was treated as a doormat for others to wipe their ambition on. She adjusted her grip on her umbrella, which was fighting a losing battle against the wind, and hurried toward her rusted sedan parked 3 blocks away to avoid the parking fees she couldn't afford. That was when it happened. In her rush to avoid a deep puddle, she slipped. Her hips slammed into the side of a vehicle parked in the shadows, her bag's metal buckle dragging across the pristine, obsidian door with a loud screeching sound. Keisha froze. The sound was a jagged tear in the fabric of the night. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, and looked at what she had done. It wasn't just a car. It was a beast, a sleek, black specialized import that looked like it cost more than her entire bloodline had earned in a century. A jagged white scar now marred its perfect paint. The street was empty. The rain was heavy. No cameras were visible in this blind spot. The easy thing, the smart thing, the survival thing would be to get in her car and drive away. No one would know. No one would ever suspect the shy, African-American secretary who barely spoke above a whisper. But Keisha couldn't move. Her grandmother's voice, a ghost of memory, whispered in her ear about integrity being what you do when no one is watching. Her hands shook violently, not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of what she was about to do. She pulled a soggy notepad from her purse, the paper damp and fragile. With a trembling hand, she wrote, "I am so sorry. I slipped and scratched your car. I can't pay it all now, but I will pay every cent. Please call me." She signed her name and number, her handwriting jagged with fear. She slipped the note into a plastic sandwich bag she had saved for her lunch and tucked it under the wiper blade, pressing it down against the cold glass. She stared at it for 1 second, a death sentence for her savings, a confession of guilt in a world that rewarded liars, and then she ran. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and sat there hyperventilating, waiting for sirens, for angry men, for the universe to strike her down. She didn't see the figure standing 20 feet away in the shadows of the alley, a man flanked by 2 large bodyguards, watching her every move. She didn't see the way the man, whose suits cost more than her annual rent, tilted his head, intrigued by the girl who apologized to a monster's car in the pouring rain. She just drove away, tears hot on her cheeks, unaware that she had just left her name in the hands of the most dangerous man the city had never dared to speak of. The next morning, the office felt sharper, colder, as if the air conditioning was pumping pure anxiety into the room alongside the recycled air. Keisha sat at her desk, her eyes rimmed with red from a sleepless night, jumping every time the phone rang. Every trill of the landline sounded like a judgment. She expected the police. She expected a scream. She expected her life to be over. "You look like you saw a ghost, Keisha," a voice drawled from above. It was Felicity, the senior executive assistant and the architect of 90% of Keisha's daily misery. Felicity was beautiful in a way that felt weaponized, sharp smiles, expensive highlights, and eyes that scanned people for weaknesses to exploit. She leaned against Keisha's cubicle, holding a latte that she would inevitably claim was made wrong so she could send Keisha back out in the cold to replace it. Or maybe you just finally realized that wearing that cardigan 2 days in a row is a fashion crime. Felicity laughed, the sound brittle and performative, designed to make the other assistants chuckle nervously. They did. They always did. Keisha just looked down at her keyboard, her fingers hovering over a spreadsheet she had already checked 3 times. "I was just tired, Felicity," Keisha whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the copier. "Tired? Honey, we're all tired. Some of us just handle it with grace." Felicity snapped, dropping a stack of unfiled reports on Keisha's desk. "Finish these by noon. And don't mess it up like you did the lunch order yesterday." Keisha swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding silently. This was her life. absorbing the venom of people who felt small and needed to make someone else feel smaller to compensate. She worked in silence, the dread of the car note sitting in her stomach like a stone. Why haven't they called? She wondered. Maybe the rain washed it away. Maybe they didn't care. But deep down, she knew that people who drove cars like that always cared. They cared about every scratch, every slight, every penny. Around 11 a.m., her personal cell phone buzzed in her pocket. The screen showed a private number. The room seemed to tilt. Her breath hitched. She stepped into the hallway, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped the phone. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice shaking. There was silence on the other end for a long, agonizing beat. Then a man's voice, smooth, low, and terrifyingly calm, spoke. "Keisha," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "You left a note on my vehicle." Keisha squeezed her eyes shut, leaning against the cold wall for support. "Yes. Yes, I did. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. I have insurance. Well, not great insurance, but I can make payments. Please don't call the police." The man on the other end paused again. "I am not interested in the police," he said, the tone unreadable, carrying an edge of danger that made the hair on her arm stand up. "I am interested in accountability. Come to the address I just texted you. Tonight, 8 p.m. Do not be late." The line went dead before she could beg, before she could explain, leaving her standing in the fluorescent hallway with the dial tone humming like a flatline. The address led her to a part of the city where the streetlights worked, the sidewalks were clean, and the buildings scraped the sky like monuments to impossible wealth. Keisha stood outside the heavy glass doors of a private club, the kind of place that didn't have a sign, just a bouncer who looked like he could punch through a brick wall. She was wearing her best blazer, which was 3 years old and slightly frayed at the cuffs, and she felt like a child wearing a costume. When she gave her name, the bouncer's stony expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps surprise, and he opened the door without a word. Inside, the air smelled of expensive scotch, leather, and silence. It was dark, lit only by amber recessed lighting. She was led to a back room, a private lounge where a single man sat on a velvet sofa. He was Korean, perhaps in his early 30s, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that were darker than the rainstorm from the night before. This was Min Ho Kong. She didn't know the name yet, didn't know he was the heir to a logistics empire that operated in the gray zones of international trade, didn't know that rival CEOs whispered rumors about what he did to people who crossed him. She only saw a man who radiated absolute, terrifying power. He didn't stand up. He just watched her walk in, his gaze dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her anxiety to see the core of who she was. On the low table in front of him sat her note, dried and wrinkled, preserved like an artifact. "Sit," he commanded softly. Keisha sat on the edge of the opposing chair, her knees pressed together, her hands clutching her purse until her knuckles turned white. "Mr. Sir," she stammered. "I brought $200. It's all I have until Friday, but..." He raised a hand, and her voice died in her throat. He picked up the note. "In this city," Kong said, his voice quiet but filling the room, "people scratch my car and they run. They hit my property and they lie. They steal from me and they smile." He looked up, locking eyes with her. The intensity was unbearable. "Why did you leave this?" Keisha blinked, tears of fear stinging her eyes. Because it was my fault," she whispered. "And it wouldn't be right to leave you with the damage I caused." Kong studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at her hands, rough from work, her cheap clothes, her terrified eyes. He had expected a hustle. He had expected someone hoping for mercy. Instead, he found a creature of pure, terrified conscience. "You work at 24/7 Global," he said. It wasn't a question. Keisha gasped. "How did you?" "I know everything I need to know," he cut her off. "You're a secretary. You are undervalued. And you are afraid." He leaned forward, the predator closing the distance. "I don't want your money, Keisha." The next week at 24/7 Global Logistics began with a hurricane of rumors. There was talk of a buyout, of a hostile takeover, of foreign investors coming to clean house. The chaotic energy in the office was palpable. Managers were shredding documents, and Felicity was applying fresh lipstick every 20 minutes, checking her reflection in her phone. "I heard the new director is terrifying," Felicity gossiped loudly, leaning over Keisha's desk. "They say he fired an entire board of directors in Seoul just by walking into the room and staring at them." "I bet he's single," she laughed, tossing her hair. "Make sure you stay out of the way when he arrives, Keisha. We don't want to look." "Low budget," Keisha didn't respond. She was trying to stop her hands from shaking. She knew who was coming. She hadn't slept since the meeting in the private club. Mr. Kong hadn't told her what he wanted from her, only that the debt was pending and that he would be seeing her soon. She felt like a mouse trapped in a cage with a snake that wasn't hungry yet. At 10 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors slid open, and a hush fell over the office that was so heavy it felt physical. A phalanx of men in dark suits marched out, moving with military precision. In the center of them was Min-ho Kong. In the daylight, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked even more dangerous. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray, tailored to a millimeter. He didn't look at the nervous executives lining up to shake his hand. He didn't acknowledge the manager, who was sweating through his shirt. He walked straight through the center of the room, his eyes scanning the space with cold, surgical indifference. Felicity stepped forward, beaming, thrusting her chest out slightly, her voice pitching up an octave. "Welcome, sir. I'm Felicity, the head executive assistant. If there is anything..." Kong walked past her as if she were a piece of office furniture. He didn't even blink. The smile froze on Felicity's face, shattering into confusion. Kong stopped in the middle of the floor. The silence was deafening. He slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the sea of terrified faces until it landed on the small, cramped desk in the corner near the bathroom. He locked eyes with Keisha. She stopped breathing. The entire office turned to look at her, the invisible girl, the punching bag. Kong stared at her for 5 agonizing seconds, his expression unreadable, before giving a microscopic nod. He turned and walked into the CEO's office, his security team closing the door behind him. The office exploded into whispers. Felicity spun around, her face twisted in jealousy and shock. "Do you know him?" she hissed at Keisha. "Why did he look at you?" Keisha could only shake her head, terrified. She knew the debt hadn't been paid. It had just been acknowledged. The toxicity in the office didn't vanish. It mutated. Now, instead of just being ignored, Keisha was a target of suspicion. Felicity was convinced that Keisha was somehow sleeping with the enemy or was a spy, and her bullying escalated from passive-aggressive comments to active sabotage. 2 days later, Mr. Kong summoned the support staff for a preliminary review. It was a test, though only Keisha sensed it. They were gathered in the conference room, Felicity, Keisha, and 2 others. Kong sat at the head of the table, reviewing files, his silence stretching the tension until it snapped. "The quarterly reports for the logistics merger," Kong said without looking up. "They are missing the risk assessment data. Who prepared this?" The room went cold. Felicity had prepared the file, but in her haste to flirt with the new VP of sales, she had skipped the appendix. Keisha saw Felicity's eyes dart around, panic rising. Then, Felicity's gaze landed on Keisha. "It was Keisha, sir." Felicity lied, her voice smooth and practiced. "Asked her to compile the data yesterday. She must have forgotten. She's been very distracted lately." The lie hung in the air, gross and heavy. The other assistants looked down, afraid to contradict the queen bee. Keisha's heart slammed against her ribs. It was the car accident all over again. A moment where she could stay silent and survive, or speak up and be crushed. But this time, the stakes were her livelihood. She looked at Kong. He wasn't looking at the file. He was looking at her, waiting. He knew. She realized with a jolt that he probably knew exactly who did what. He was the man who had tracked her down from a license plate in 12 hours. This was the test. Keisha started, her voice trembling. Felicity glared at her, a warning in her eyes. "I did not prepare that section," Keisha said, her voice shaking but clear. "But I did proofread the final copy, and I should have caught the omission. I apologize for letting it slip through." She didn't accept the lie, but she took responsibility for the team's failure. It was a nuanced, honest defense. Felicity scoffed. Oh, please. You just forgot. Kong slammed the file shut. The sound was like a gunshot. He stood up, walking slowly around the table toward them. He stopped behind Felicity. In my experience, Kong said softly, people who lie about small things will lie about big things. And people who own their mistakes even when it is painful. He walked past Felicity and stopped in front of Keisha. Are the only ones I can trust with my money. He dropped a new file on Keisha's desk. You are now my direct liaison for the transition. Move your things to the office next to mine. He turned back to Felicity, his voice dropping to a glacial chill. Pack your box. You're done. The transition to the executive floor was not a fairy tale. It was a trial by fire in a glass cage. Keisha sat at her new desk, a sleek expanse of mahogany that felt too large for her, surrounded by walls of floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city she used to feel crushed by. But the view offered no comfort, only the dizzying sensation of being suspended in midair, exposed to every judgment. The whispers hadn't stopped with Felicity's departure. They had merely changed frequency, shifting from overt bullying to a low-frequency hum of skepticism that vibrated through the office. The charity case, they called her when they thought she couldn't hear, or the pet project, every email she sent was scrutinized by department heads waiting for a typo. Every coffee she poured was watched for a spill. Keisha worked with a desperate, frantic precision, arriving an hour before Minho Kong and leaving long after the cleaning crews had started their rounds. She learned the rhythms of the logistics empire, the flow of shipping containers in Singapore, the labor strikes in Rotterdam, the delicate ego of the vice president of operations. Through it all, Minho was a silent, monolithic presence in the office next door. He rarely spoke to her beyond terse commands, yet she could feel his attention, a heavy, tangible weight that rested on her shoulders. He was testing her, she knew. He was waiting to see if the integrity she showed in the rain was a fluke or a foundation. Then, 2 weeks into her new role, the sabotage struck. It didn't come with an explosion, but with a terrifying silence. It was late. The office was a blue-hued cavern of shadows, and Keisha was finalizing the confidential merger contracts for the Seoul expansion. She hit save on the encrypted server, and the screen blinked black. A red text box appeared. Access denied. Files corrupted. User, Keisha W. Her stomach dropped through the floor. The files worth billions were gone. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She typed frantically, trying to recover the backup, but the system was locked down, cementing the error under her digital signature. It looked like gross negligence at best, corporate espionage at worst. The door to Minho's office opened. He stood there, silhouetted against the city lights, his face a mask of stone. He didn't yell. He didn't storm over. He simply walked to her desk, looked at the red screen, and then looked at her. The silence stretched for an eternity, thick enough to choke on. I didn't. Keisha's voice was a broken whisper. I swear, Mr. Kong, I didn't delete them. I just hit save. Minho studied her, his dark eyes searching for the lie he was so used to finding in others. The logs show your keystrokes, Keisha, he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had glimpsed that night at the club. This merger is the cornerstone of my tenure. If these files are gone, the deal collapses by morning. He turned away, walking to the window, his back to her. It was a dismissal. It was the end. Security will escort you out while IT attempts a recovery, he said to the glass. Go. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Keisha grabbed her purse, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the strap. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, that someone had set her up, but she knew how it looked. The street mouse had finally been caught in the trap. She walked to the elevators, her legs numb, passing the smirking faces of the night shift staff who had been waiting for her to fail. The lobby was empty except for the night guard, an older man named Marcus who had been with the building since it was poured concrete. He was the only person who had ever smiled at her when she was just a secretary, and he sat behind the marble desk with the stillness of a man who had seen everything. He watched Keisha walk toward the revolving doors, her head down, tears tracking silent, hot paths through her makeup. She stopped at the door, the rain outside mirroring the night her life had changed. She couldn't go out there. Not like this. Not with the shame of a crime she didn't commit burning on her skin. She turned and saw Marcus watching her, his eyes kind and sad. "Heavy night, Miss Keisha?" he asked, his voice gravelly and warm. She choked back a sob. "I ruined it, Marcus. Or they think I did." "I'm done," Marcus nodded slowly, not surprised. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You know," he said, "I've watched men in $10,000 suits walk out of here in handcuffs, and I've watched folks with holes in their shoes run the city. The truth has a funny way of floating, but only if you don't let them drown you first." He slid a small, folded piece of paper across the marble. "I saw someone logging into the server room physically about an hour ago."
"Not you."
"Someone who used an old keycard." Keisha froze. "Who?" she whispered. Marcus tapped the paper. "I can't say. But the cameras in the hallway. They don't blink." He gave her a significant look. "If you leave now, you're guilty. If you turn around, you're fighting." Something inside Keisha snapped, not a break, but a setting of bone. The timid girl who apologized for existing, who wrote notes on scratched cars because she feared retribution, was gone. In her place was a woman who had tasted respect and refused to spit it out. She took the paper. It was a timestamp. She didn't leave. Instead, she turned around and hit the elevator button. The ride up felt different this time. It wasn't an ascent to judgment, but a rise to war. When the doors opened, the floor was chaotic. IT technicians were swarming Keisha's desk. Minho was standing in the center of the storm, his tie loosened, barking orders in Korean into a phone. He stopped when he saw her. The room went silent. "I told you to leave," he said, his voice dangerous. Keisha walked past the technicians, past the whispers, and stood directly in front of him. She was trembling, but her chin was high. "I didn't delete those files," she said, her voice clear and ringing through the room. "And I'm not leaving until I prove it." She slammed the timestamp Marcus had given her onto the desk. "Check the physical access logs for the server room at 8:42 p.m. Someone bypassed the remote login to plant the corruption directly. My terminal was just the trigger." Minho looked at the paper, then at her. For a moment, the air crackled with the tension of their proximity, the immovable object meeting the unstoppable force. He snatched the paper and handed it to the head technician.
"Check it," he commanded. "Now."
The minutes that followed were agonizing. The technician typed furiously, sweat beading on his forehead. Keisha stood like a statue, refusing to sit, refusing to look away from Minho. He watched her, and for the first time, she saw something behind his eyes, not anger, but a desperate, guarded hope.
He wanted her to be right.
He needed her to be right. "Sir," the technician said, his voice shaking. "She's right. There was a physical breach. We traced the ID." The technician hesitated. It was authorized under an old executive override. "The ID belongs to Felicity Vance." The name hit the room like a bomb. Felicity. She hadn't just left. She had left a time bomb. She had used a duplicate keycard to frame Keisha and destroy the merger out of spite. Minho didn't speak. He closed his eyes for a second, a muscle in his jaw jumping. When he opened them, the ice was gone. He looked at Keisha, really looked at her, seeing the steel spine beneath the soft exterior. "Restore the backup from the physical drive," Minho ordered the team, his voice calm again. "And call legal. I want Felicity Vance buried." He turned to Keisha. "Walk with me." He led her not to his office, but to the private elevator that went to the roof. They rode in silence, the air thick with the adrenaline of the near-miss. The roof was a wind-swept helipad, the city sprawled out beneath them like a grid of diamonds. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. Minho walked to the edge, looking out over his empire. Keisha stood a few feet behind him, shivering slightly in the wind. "My father built this company on fear," Minho said quietly, his back to her. "He taught me that trust is a weakness, that everyone will stab you if you turn your back. I have spent my life waiting for the knife." He turned to face her, the wind catching his dark hair. "When I saw your note on my car, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a trap, a ploy to get close to me. No one apologizes in this world, Keisha. No one takes responsibility unless they are forced." He took a step toward her, his gaze intense. "Tonight, I thought I was right. I thought you were just another lie." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out her old, crumpled note, now laminated in a thin protective plastic. He held it up. But you came back. You fought for your name. You are the only thing in this entire city that is real. Keisha felt the tears finally spill over, the tension leaving her body in a rush. I couldn't let you think I was like them, she whispered. Minho stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood and rain on him. I don't, he said softly. Keisha, tomorrow is the shareholder meeting. They will want blood for the scared knight. Stand next to me, not as a secretary, as my partner in this. The shareholder meeting was a Shark Tank. 50 of the most powerful investors in Asia and America sat around a table that cost more than Keisha's childhood home. The air was hostile. News of the data breach had leaked, and they were smelling weakness. Minho stood at the head of the table, Keisha at his right hand. She wore a new suit, sharp and tailored, purchased with her first real paycheck. She didn't look down. She looked them in the eye. A heavy-set man with a cigar, Mr. Sterling, slammed his hand on the table. This is incompetence, Kong. A breach of this magnitude during a merger? We hear it was your new assistant, he sneered the word, casting a dismissive look at Keisha. We demand a restructuring. You are losing your grip. The murmurs of agreement were loud. Minho stayed silent, letting them vent, his face impassive. He waited until the room quieted, the tension stretching to a breaking point. Then he looked at Keisha. She stepped forward, connecting her tablet to the main screen. Mr. Sterling, Keisha said, her voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. The breach was not incompetence. It was an attack. And it has been neutralized. On the giant screen behind her, the logs appeared, not the corrupted files, but the security footage of Felicity entering the server room, followed by a digital trail of the money transfer Felicity had accepted from Mr. Sterling's own shell company to perform the sabotage. The room gasped. Mr. Sterling turned a violent shade of purple. This is preposterous, he sputtered. This is the truth. Keisha cut him off, her voice gaining strength, ringing with the authority of someone who had nothing to hide. We recovered the files. The merger is secure. And we have identified the leak in this room. She looked directly at Sterling. It isn't us, Minho stepped forward then, his presence overwhelming. You tried to break my company by attacking the one person you thought was weak, Minho said, his voice low and lethal. You made a miscalculation. You assumed she would fold. You assumed she had a price. He placed a hand on Keisha's shoulder, a public declaration of protection and equality. Security is waiting for you, Sterling. Get out of my building. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, one by one, the other shareholders nodded. Respect.
Fear.
Acknowledgement. Keisha breathed out, feeling her heart settle. She hadn't just survived. She had rewritten the rules. 3 months later, the rain was falling again, but it looked different from the passenger seat of the black specialized import. Minho was driving, which his security team hated, but he insisted. They pulled up to the curb of the old coffee shop where Keisha used to buy her cheap lunches. She looked at the window, seeing her old life like a distant memory. She turned to Minho. He was watching her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips, a rare expression reserved only for her. Why here? She asked. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small box. Inside was a key, not to a car, but to an office. The director of operations needs a new office, he said. One with a view. Keisha took the key, feeling the weight of it. I scratched your car, she laughed softly, a sound of pure relief. And now you're giving me an empire. Minho looked out at the rain, then back at her. You didn't scratch a car, Keisha. You woke me up. He started the engine, the purr of the machine deep and powerful. Let's go home. As they drove away, the rain washed over the city, not erasing it this time, but cleaning it, leaving everything shining and new under the streetlights.